welcome to Sexually Charged Radio, co-hosted by Ruth Newstifter and Thomas Sasso.
We and our guests discuss your questions about sex, sexuality, and gender in a sex-positive, safe, and educational manner. Hi, this is Ruthie, and I'm here with
Thomas Sasso.
And we're here on Sexually Charged Radio with our great two guest hosts for today. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi, I'm Nicole.
Hi, Nicole. I am so glad that you're both here. Usually we start by just introducing ourselves and why we're here and kind of our areas of interest and stuff like that. Do you want? It looks like you want to start, Sheila. Go for it.
Oh, I am currently a psychology student in co-op, and I have a minor in family child studies, and I'm very interested in the field that Dr. Ruth is in, and I'm very thankful for this opportunity to be here and get more exposure for myself.
We're super glad that you're here, definitely. And you can call me Ruthie if you want to, because we're not in class at this moment when I'm usually Dr. N. Do you want to introduce yourself, Nicole?
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineering student, and I'm extremely interested in all these topics, and also I'm very thankful for this opportunity.
You two make my ego so great. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Thomas. I am one of the regular hosts on the show.
You are?
And we've been doing this for a while, Ruthie.
I know. We've I don't know when we started recording, but we've been going for a bit now.
So I'm still grateful, though, that we're doing this and have so much fun doing this. I'm a PhD candidate in psychology here at Guelph. With a focus on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, but also, the side fun of just sexual health, sexual well-being, sex, gender, relationships.
All our favorite stuff.
Yay
Absolutely.
for sex.
Yay.
What about you? Do you want to do a little introduction, Ruthie?
I'm Ruthie. I'm Dr. Ruth Newstifter. So I teach over in couple and family therapy, and I also teach some undergrad courses as well, which is how I know at least one of our guest hosts. Mm-hmm. That class is 500 students. Nicole, are you in that class?
I am not, unfortunately.
Oh, well, maybe in the future, but that kind of relieves me because I always feel bad when I don't recognize, but with such a large class, it is a little hard to know. So, let's see. So I do research on a bunch of different areas. So resilience after trauma is one of my areas, which includes sexual assault, but also other kinds of trauma like medicalized trauma and things like that. And I also do a lot on sexual well-being and pleasure for sex and gender diverse populations, as well as non-mainstream relationship structures, so diverse relationship structures. So folks who have been listening for a while probably know more about me than they want to, and they'll get to learn about everybody today even more. Does somebody want to start out with one of our first questions? These were wonderfully submitted by some students at dorm Q&A night that I attended recently. They're all non-identifying questions. I thought it would be great to give it a little more time and discussion than we had the opportunity for before. Nicole or Sheila, would you be interested?
Sure. Okay. So our first question is, my friend is in an abusive relationship physically and emotionally. As their friend, what can I do?
This is a big question, and I think it's something that is much more common than anyone really wants to acknowledge. So the first thing I usually do when there's a question is just ask what your first impressions are about the question. You don't even have to worry about giving a full-fledged answer, but just kind of what's in your heart or your mind as soon as you hear this. Nicole?
They obviously seem very concerned about their friend and reaching out to a professional. They're obviously trying to really get some help here, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of caring in that question. Mm-hmm. What are your first thoughts, Sheila?
Whenever someone is put in a situation like this, I think their first instinct is to help, and that is what they're doing here. However, I know it can be tough in situations when there is an abusive relationship, just because there is it's conflicting between the abuser and you as a friend and the person stuck in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I'm thinking about this, it's a tough spot to be in for both of these two friends, mm-hmm. right, with each other. And it is something that's so terribly common. And there's some research out there that isn't exactly about this situation, but that suggests when we are trying to pick out who we're dating, it's our friends who recognize who we tend to more than anyone else. So mm-hmm. that suggests that sometimes our friends are a bit more aware of situations than we are, which makes sense when they're in the middle of something that's difficult. But there's a lot of knowledge from both folks, and this is a tough place to be. What stands out to you first, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of really good points that have been made. The part that actually sticks out with me is often when I see requests for questions, people like to put, my friend is in, my friend is doing this. And sometimes that's also a bit of a crutch that individuals use by putting my friend, and they're actually talking about themselves.
Could be the case.
And
yeah.
we don't know in the case of this letter writer, and I'm not saying that that is the case with this question
It's the case
writer.
for somebody out there, whether it's this person or not.
And so I think it's important that when we hear these kinds of questions, we recognize that it's not always actually being asked for a friend, but if somebody says, oh, this is happening to a friend, they might actually be talking about themselves. So we should be careful when we get these questions about how we respond, because it isn't always that third-party reference.
Sure, and being on the radio, folks who are listening, it could be about themselves, it could be about a friend, it could be that they're concerned that they are the abusive party. So yeah, there's a lot to consider. So I also think there's kind of like an elephant in the room or an unsaid with this too, which is how do I help a person? And then the follow-up question that I often hear when I'm doing outreach around this is why don't people help themselves more? Why don't people choose to leave? And that particular wording is problematic, but it tends to be what people come up with as a question. So I'm wondering if we can roll that into this discussion as well, if that's appropriate. So does anyone have a piece of advice for this off the top of their heads? As we all make faces, thinking really hard. Thomas, do you have a thought?
Well, I think the first part is, and going with the premise that this is somebody's friend, and the friend has come to them indicating that there is an emotionally abusive or physically abusive situation. The first part is, don't keep it to yourself. Seek some professional assistance. Unless you are personally qualified in training on how to deal with someone who's been in an emotionally abusive situation,
And physically here too.
And physically,
yeah.
sorry. I don't pretend to be an expert unless you are. I think it's our first inclination. We want to be there. We want to help our friend, but we need to be careful and cautious in the advice we give or the recommendations, because when we're not professionally associated or have some training, we can sometimes make the situation worse, and we can push somebody to do something that could actually exacerbate the situation. I always struggle with that word, exacerbate.
It's such a good word, though.
It is.
So when I hear you saying that, I'm thinking about the different roles that different people have in our lives. So there's a really important role for friends to do the friend things. There's an important role for professionals to do the professional things, and police do the police things if there are police things involved in this. And to recognize that one person can't do everything. And when I heard you say that, I thought of kind of two different thoughts, which is that making sure that the friend who's in the abusive situation has access to resources if they want them and to accurate and supportive information. But also for the friend who is watching their friend get abused, they deserve support too, right? Because that is a really difficult thing. Nicole and Sheila, what are your thoughts?
From like the looks of it, and I don't mean to be assuming anything, but when a person is seeing someone they're close with or even a friend going through something like this, it can be seen as like a toxic situation. And the thing with toxic situations is that it is going to affect you either way, whether you like it or not type of thing, when you want to help out. And I'm really sorry if I'm not answering your question, but when a person, I think, is in a situation like this, I think they're caught between, do I tell someone? Will this person be upset if I tell someone?
Right.
And I think that can be one of the main struggles that they have to come to deal with.
Well, and the telling is an interesting point, too, because sometimes there can be the thought that if I do anything, I have to do everything. And so, you know, if the friend who is not in the abusive situation, which, by the way, is an assumption, they could both be in abusive relationships, but if the friend who's written the question were to talk to someone, you don't have to identify the friend who's been in the abusive situation. If the person who is in an abusive situation decides to talk to anyone or utilize resources, they don't have to press charges. They don't have to identify the significant other. They can just be looking for personal support, trying to find the folks who are best for them, and finding out what their options are. When I used to do domestic violence response way back before I went to grad school and all those things, a big part of what they trained us was that if you're a friend or a caring professional or whoever you are, you still don't get to tell the other person what to do. They've got one person or more in their life telling them what to do already. And you may feel that it's different because it's in their best interest. Like, I care about my friend, so what I'm advising them to do or trying to get them to do or trying to coerce them into doing is in their best interest, unlike the abusive partner doesn't have their best interest in mind. It's still controlling another person, and that is what we can't step in to do. And it will backfire. It will backfire the vast majority of the time, if not always, for sure. Nor is it respectful. Nicole, I see a lot of agreeing.
I am, and I am agreeing very much. Also, just going off of the whole like emotional abuse part of this is that a lot of the times when someone is being emotionally abused, it'll be wishy-washy, so to speak, in the sense where it's like they may have very strong feelings for this abuser, like they may love this abuser, but then of course there's a drawback of being abused. So then just like playing with their emotions, whatnot, maybe even though they've come to tell their friend like, oh, this is happening, but like the next day, the next week, it might go away, so to speak, and then come back and whatnot, just because it's emotional, and sometimes that happens. But of course, just being sensitive with their minds, with their bodies, whatnot, being their friend, being there for them, but again, taking the proper action because it is needed if you yourself don't have the requirements to handle this by yourself, I guess.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. And anytime someone's in a relationship that isn't a good choice for them, whether it's abusive or not, let me restart this thing. I think we can all think of times when ourselves or our close friends have stayed in a relationship too long, even with no abuse involved. Human beings in general aren't real great at knowing when to end a relationship. People tend to do it kind of very early without a lot of effort, or very late. I don't know anyone personally who just says, you know what, this is the moment when it's done. And I think to myself, wow, that was well thought out. And you have some sort of secret magical knowledge. Most folks really struggle too early, too late, whatever. And so to expect someone who has way more on their mind and is not in their best place, and abuse is like trying to walk in an earthquake. It's very difficult to keep your balance, and your focus becomes much more on getting through to the next second than an overall earthquake plan. You're just trying to get through a series of crises that keep happening, and you're off balance the whole time. So why would your decision making be better in that situation? And it's also important to remember that very, very few people out there are just complete monsters, right? Mm-hmm. So we see, someone who's abusing our friends, and we think this person is bad news, but there are also positive sides to them, or sides that are valuable as a person. And so that can make it difficult too. It can make you want to defend, well, you're not seeing the positive sides, or these are the reasons I stay in the relationship, if we can just reduce the negative parts. Now, in my personal and professional experience, those negative parts generally don't go away, especially for the age group in the dorm. There's kind of some debate for folks who are considerably older. But it doesn't get better on its own. It's the person who is being abusive who holds themselves accountable and really pursues their own healing. That is when change tends to happen, and it doesn't tend to happen any other way, in a way that's lasting, right? So there may be less acts of violence over time, research tells us, but generally that's because the control has already been established.
Yeah, and we just want to remind viewers that you're listening to Sexually Charged Radio at CFRU 93.3 FM in the Guelph area. You can listen to us online at cfru.ca or on YouTube by searching Sexually Charged Radio.
You can also send your questions in to asksc@uoguelph.ca. Those questions go into an email box that's monitored by the wonderful folks at Student Wellness, and they take a look at the questions. They send some of them in our direction, and so those are the folks who are receiving them, and it is wonderful to have their help and their collaboration in this show. Did we have any other, perhaps one closing thought from each of us for this particular asker? Does anyone want to go first?
I think also one thing to keep in mind is that although it says abusive relationships can also be not only romantic but also platonic, where there's just like a friend can still be abusive and toxic to you.
Good point. Absolutely. Thomas, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Sheila, that just nailed my point. So that was, but I think in addition to that, I'd like to say that if this person is coming to you as a friend, that's a strong testament that they care about your friendship, and your friendship might be that tether for them. So respect that, own that, acknowledge and be grateful to them for being willing to share with you. I think a lot of people are scared and nervous about opening up to someone about that. So if you can illustrate or verbalize that to them and say, thank you, I appreciate that's difficult information. I want you to know you can trust me. That reassurance can be so huge, and that part about being a friendship can create a deeper friendship going forward. But respecting that they did choose you to go to, and that's very meaningful.
Yes, it was very, going off of that, it was very courageous for that person's friend to come to them. And then in the same way, it was very courageous for this friend to take the next step and like get some help if they were not able to provide that themselves. So I guess it was just the act of taking that next step is like very important, not just in this situation, but in many others, whether it be an abusive relationship or whatever the case may be. Just taking that step is wonderful.
And building off Nicole's themes around kindness and authenticity that I was hearing there, to remember that to stay tied into the authenticity of that friendship, you can be there to remind that person of their best selves, which is probably not how they feel they are with that abusive person. And that sense of contrast that somebody still sees me as a great person who's not abusive and not telling me what to do can be what encourages and helps people leave that situation. Similarly, be kind to yourself as well. You can set your own boundaries. You can be there for your friend, but it may not be the time and place for your friend to change. And it may not be the time and place for you to be spending a lot of time with that friend if it's not healthy for you. So keeping in mind that you deserve support and can also set your own boundaries as well. Great. Shall we move on to the next question, which is a similar theme? Did anyone else want to read this one?
Sure. The next question is, how do you get past sexual assault trauma so you can enjoy new relationships?
First impressions on this question. Thomas, you want to go first this time?
How about yourself, Ruthie? You never seem to get to go first.
I love to go first. That's why I try not to. I just make this the Ruthie show. Yeah, so this is an area that I do a lot of outreach and research work in. And personal experience as well. So, when I hear this question, my first thought is to remember that you are not broken and you will never be broken. That doesn't mean that things will ever be the same as they were before, but you are still a full person with a multifaceted identity and all kinds of amazing, valuable things about yourself. And to remember that all of that you bring to new relationships is valuable things that you're bringing to the table. You have learned and grown in ways that are amazing. You shouldn't have had to learn it like that, but that has happened and we can't do anything about that. And so your whole self is a bonus, awesome thing in the relationship, and it's never in spite of anything. That's my first thought.
Anyone else want to add in an initial first thought?
That was more than initial, sorry.
Also, it's just, I guess, I suppose it's a matter of time and support. It's different for every person. So all because someone may have been able to get past the trauma in like a shorter amount of time than you yourself have been able to, that doesn't make you any like weaker than they are. Doesn't mean that they were like less affected, even if it was the exact same case. And again, it takes different levels of support. Just however much you need is however much you should like give to yourself or take from others.
Other first thoughts?
So I might jump in, and my first thought here is that I wouldn't want anyone to put pressure on themselves that the next relationship after a sexual assault needs to be perfect. I think we can sort of overcompensate after an experience and say, well, this traumatic event happened to me. Now I need to find the perfect person, and I need to enjoy it. It's okay if that's a struggle. It's okay if that when you're getting into that relationship, it's not 100% enjoyable in the sense of you feeling perfect with yourself. I'm not saying that you should compromise and not go for somebody who's good for you. Absolutely not.
It's not like you have something to prove to yourself more than anyone else does in any relationship at this point. You don't have to this isn't your do-over that has to be perfect to redeem yourself.
Yeah, thank you. That's clarification I think I needed there. And so it's okay if that enjoyment takes some time, that it takes getting to know the person a little bit more to feel that enjoyment that you felt prior to the sexual assault trauma. That would be my initial reaction to the question.
Any other first thoughts?
So mine, going off of Thomas's, would be the big thing of self-care. So like and there's that whole cheesy quote, but it's also very true of like the best way to love someone else is to make sure you're loved, that you love yourself first. So I think that is the first point to get past in order for you to be able to reciprocate that. And as well as what Ruthie said before, you're not broken, but you're also not tainted and you're not dirty. You're still the person you are. You're still a human being. You still have integrity, and that's about it. thing?
So there can be lots of different resources for moving forward on something like this. And some of the stuff that's supported by research includes mindfulness or meditation or prayer or kind of even coloring at this point, they're finding can be helpful with things related to this. So finding that place where it's kind of your happy, centered place in yourself where you can return to over and over. And you can find professionals to help you with this. You certainly deserve someone who's completely in your court and knows how to guide or listen or support or whatever it is that you need. But there's also a lot of great resources just on YouTube and other places. So you want to be a good critical consumer of your resources and find things that are reputable and that really work for you. But even just starting with that calming place and finding a way to be calm in your own self. So after a sexual assault, there can be a whole range of things that happen with our bodies and our minds and things like that as we get into new relationships. And I'm especially thinking new sexual relationships. And it could just be a sense of nervousness or a sense of foreboding, or it could be really serious where there are panic attacks or even worse sorts of situations that are happening for people. And all of these things are absolutely normal, and none of these things need to keep you from being in positive relationships throughout your future. The more intense and the more disruptive the things are that are happening in your life, the more it might be helpful to turn to someone who really has the good resources, because you shouldn't have to be figuring out how to do it and doing it at the same time. Having someone else around who can kind of help you figure out the how and support you in the doing, you absolutely deserve that, as we all do with many big things in our lives, not just this.
Well, and I think another piece about getting past the sexual assault trauma and going into a new relationship that these resources can be good for is how to communicate about your past experiences. So I know I've had questions before, individuals that I've talked to and worked with who just aren't sure how do you tell someone in a new relationship that this is some experience that you've had and that has resulted in certain changes in your attitude or behavior. And so using some of these resources about how to start those conversations or have some of those conversations can be really useful. So you're not reinventing the wheel and saying, well, how does this conversation work? Because I want to share this information. If you do want to share that information, again, that comes down to your preference and choice in the matter. But knowing that those resources are out there to help facilitate broaching that subject with a new partner.
Absolutely. And, I think it's very easy for folks to sit around a table and kind of give advice and stuff like that. So I'm not asking anyone else to do this, but I'll just disclose that this has absolutely happened to me before, and there's been sexual assaults in my life. So for myself, and speaking from my own personal experience, one thing that's been really important to me is that if I'm getting into a new, especially sexual relationship with someone, so I'm talking about an ongoing instead of a casual situation, that I make sure that I only pick people that I can feel comfortable enough to make that sort of disclosure with, whether it's ahead of time or whether it's in the moment if something unexpected occurs. So not everyone will make that decision, but that's been helpful for me. However, if it is a sort of much more casual thing where we're really not going to talk about ourselves much at all, then I'm making sure that I'm setting boundaries around the interaction that make me feel like I am unlikely to encounter a situation where I'm going to want to disclose that. And so remembering that you can have a lot of agency in who you decide to have a longer term thing with. And you don't ever need to tell someone, what, I don't think I can tell my important stuff to you, so I'm going to break up with you. It's just not working out. That sense of not being able to tell you maybe is really important knowledge that this is just not a person that I can talk to. Maybe it's me, maybe it's them. It doesn't matter. It's just not going to happen. But also in a casual situation, you can absolutely say, these things are on the table. These things are off the table. If I would like to hear you're on and off the table, and if we don't have good overlap, this is not going to happen. Did you have a thought, Nicole? You look like you're thinking that.
Kind of. I myself have not had to go through this sort of experience, but I find I do have, unfortunately, several friends who have, and I find sexual assault trauma, it's quite like an umbrella term, and unfortunately, due to the severity that my certain friends have put on to their trauma experience, they've gone through certain levels of getting help. Some have gotten help, while some have just kind of pushed it under the rug, trying to get past it by themselves, which of course is an extremely courageous and brave thing to do, and hats off to them. But just sometimes, like as mentioned before, the communication is kind of lacking, whether it be with friends, with professionals, with anybody other than outside of their mind. So just some people, again, downplay these awful experiences that have happened to them, and they never should, because of course it ranges with each person, and it's severe no matter what if you like feel it is. So you should always get help, and I just find that helps. I don't know.
That was great. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Sheila?
One thing I just like to remind anyone who's listening there that sexual assault doesn't necessarily mean rape. I know I've had conversations with a few people, and sometimes they just forget that sexual assault is unwanted sexual touch or penetration, or it can even sometimes be catcalling be classified. I might be wrong on that.
It depends. I mean, that's kind of a verbal assault going on. But yeah, kissing that you don't want to happen.
Yeah.
People who kind of pin you in a corner, and then, there may be a groping thing.
Yep.
I've certainly been at dance clubs where people are just sticking a hand down the pants. That is not okay. There was no consent.
No.
That's a sexual assault. Absolutely. And people often feel there needs to be this line that's crossed. I am sure that somewhere there are laws and judiciary processes where there are lines, but when it comes to our hearts and our minds and our bodies, it was bad, and thus it was bad, right? And maybe the word assault doesn't work for you and you don't want to use that word, but it doesn't have to cross a line for it to be taken seriously. If it's serious to you, it's serious.
Exactly. And I know now they're even saying in elementary schools how it's common for little boys to go snap bra-straps. That is a form of sexual assault.
Not okay.
It's not okay whatsoever. There's even if someone is touching you and you don't like the way they're touching you, that I believe is classified as sexual assault. And that's just my personal opinion. However, if anyone else has anything different.
It's just not okay.
It's not okay.
So on my way here to the radio station, I know we have just a couple of minutes left. There's a person who almost got hit by a car. So I jumped out and they're crying and stuff. And even in that moment, I stop and say, would you like a hug? They have to come to me and initiate it because they're not they might say yes to anything at that point because they're freaking out. And then during the hug, I am saying it's okay. And then I'm also saying, as soon as you let go, I'll let go, sort of thing. So as long as you want. So even in those situations, we're talking about this is a person's physical autonomy, but also with the ears as part of the physical too. So the things we say to each other. We have just a little bit of time left. Thomas, we haven't heard much from you. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, this did come from a campus Q&A session, correct?
Yeah, this is real stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we continue to realize that campus community and campus safety is a part of everyone's responsibility on a university campus. It's the responsibility of administration, it's the responsibility of faculty and staff, of graduate students, undergraduate students, and the community members who are around the campus. So I do want to, put a call out and saying, if you know of this happening in your dorms, if you know of it happening on campus, please do not be a bystander. Please speak up. Every campus has policies in place for reporting, either through campus security or campus police. Some campuses have tip lines or sexual assault teams. So please, if you know that sexual assault is happening and you're not able to provide the direct support, please consider being an active member who calls it out, who responds to it. And sexual assault happens to everyone across the gender spectrum in different ways, as we've talked about. So for me, I think that's my little call to action to our listenership. If you're seeing something and you're concerned about it, please don't be afraid to report it and allow somebody in an authoritative position to assist with that process.
Absolutely. And to remember that it's to whatever level that folks want that to happen. So letting somebody know and asking for help doesn't mean you have to go all the way through to taking somebody to court or something like that. It means you're getting that support and you're finding out what your options are and the best help available. I think we are just about out of time, so we should wrap it. Thank you so much for listening to us on CFRU. You can listen at cfru.ca. We're at 93.3 FM in the Guelph area, and you can email questions to asksc@uoguelph.ca. Thank you so much for joining us, Nicole and Sheila, and we can't wait to have you on our next half hour.
Thank you.